Commander Kim Dae-ho stood in the smoking command center and watched his world fall apart. The enemy ships filled the screen like angry red dots. Each dot was a Vex warship, carrying enough firepower to destroy a moon. His young officers ran around, the room shouting orders that nobody could follow anymore. The defense station shook as another plasma blast hit the shields. The war had been going on for 3 years. Earth and her colonies fought bravely against the Vex Empire, but it was not enough. The aliens were too strong, too cruel, too willing to do anything to win. They burned entire planets just to make a point. They captured human soldiers and used them as living shields. They showed no mercy to anyone. Lieutenant Park. So-Min stood at her station with tears in her eyes. She was only 22 years old, fresh from the academy. She had joined the Earth Navy to protect people, to be a hero. Now she watched helplessly as the enemy closed in. The tactical display showed dozens of Vex, ships surrounding their position. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. Kim Dae-ho had been fighting this war since the beginning. He remembered when the first Vex ships appeared at the edge of human space. The aliens demanded that humanity surrender and become slaves. When Earth refused, the killing began. The Vex were not like other alien species they had met before. They did not want to trade or talk. They only wanted to conquer. The communication officer turned to Dae-ho with a grim expression. "Sir, we are getting reports from all sectors. The main fleet is destroyed. Admiral Chen is dead. The Mars defense grid has fallen. They are heading straight for Earth." Dae-ho closed his eyes and thought about his family on Earth. His wife, his 2 children. They would all die if the Vex reached the planet. The aliens did not take prisoners from the species they conquered. They either killed everyone or turned them into slaves working in terrible conditions until they died. Young officers kept asking what they should do. Some wanted to fight to the end. Others wanted to try to negotiate. But Dae-ho knew the truth. The modern Earth Navy was not cruel enough to win this war. They followed rules. They tried to be honorable. They treated prisoners well. They avoided civilian targets. The Vex laughed at such weakness. The defense station shook again. This time the lights went out for a few seconds. Emergency power kicked in, bathing everything in red light. Lieutenant Park. So-Min looked at her commander, waiting for orders that might save them all. But Dae-ho was thinking about something else, something he had hoped never to use. 50 years ago, before the Galactic Alliance formed, humans fought different wars. They were called the Resource Wars, and they happened in the outer colonies far from Earth where nobody watched what happened. Humans fought other humans for water, for minerals, for living space. Those wars were brutal, dirty, and personal. The soldiers who survived learned that honor was a luxury that got you killed. Most people tried to forget about the Resource Wars. They were embarrassed by what humans had done to each other during those dark times. The survivors were pushed aside when the Alliance formed. The new military wanted clean soldiers who could represent humanity well among the alien species. But those old soldiers were still alive, still waiting. Dae-ho walked to a sealed cabinet in the corner of the command room. Inside was a communication device that had not been used in decades. The emergency protocol was simple. When all else failed, when the young, clean military could not save humanity, it was time to call the old wolves back to war. His hand shook as he activated the device. The message went out on frequencies that only the veterans knew. It was short and simple. The children have failed. The pack must hunt again. Come home. Lieutenant Park. So-Min watched in confusion as her commander sent out the strange message. "Sir, what are you doing? Who are you calling?" The young officer had never heard of the Resource Wars or the men and women who fought them. Within minutes, the first responses came back. Voices from the Outer Rim. Voices from hidden bases on dead worlds. Voices from ships that did not officially exist anymore. Old soldiers who had been waiting for this day, they were coming home. The first ship appeared on the sensors an hour later. It was an old cruiser with armor plating that had been welded and rewelded dozens of times. The hull was covered in scorch marks and what looked like tally marks. More ships followed, each one different, each one showing signs of countless battles. Captain Lee Wan-soo was the first to board the defense station. He was a big man with gray hair and scars covering half his face. His uniform was patched and faded, but his eyes were sharp and alert. He looked around the clean, modern command center and smiled like a wolf seeing sheep. The young officers stared at him in shock. This man looked more like a pirate than a military officer. His ship smelled of engine oil and recycled air. His crew wore mismatched equipment and carried weapons that were not standard issue. But they moved with confidence. They were not afraid. Wansu studied the tactical displays, showing the Vex positions. He laughed when he saw how the aliens were arranged. Their formations were perfect for crushing an honorable enemy, but they had weak points that only someone who fought dirty would notice. You kids have been playing by their rules, he told the shocked officers. No wonder you are losing. The Vex think they are the biggest predators in the galaxy. Time to show them what real predators look like. More veteran ships arrived every hour. They came from all directions using routes that did not appear on any official star chart. Their captains gathered around the tactical displays and started planning. The young officers tried to object when they heard the weapons and tactics being discussed. These were banned by every civilized. Treaty Chief Engineer Choi Minho arrived on the third day. She was a small woman with permanently stained hands and eyes that seemed to see through metal and circuits. She took one look at the Alliance ships and shook her head. These pretty boats will not win a real war, she said. We need to make some changes. The modifications began immediately. Safety systems were removed. Reactors were pushed beyond their limits. Weapons that had been stored in secret armories for decades were brought out and installed. The young crew members watched in horror as their clean ships were turned into something else, something dangerous. Captain Eugene A. volunteered for the most dangerous mission. She would take a small team deep into enemy space to deliver a message. The young officers asked what message could be worth such a risk. Jin-A smiled the same wolf smile as the other veterans. We are going to tell them who they are really fighting, she said. As the preparations continued, Kim Dae-ho watched his young officers struggle to understand. They had been trained to be heroes, to fight with honor, to represent the best of humanity. But the old soldiers were showing them something different. They were showing them how to survive the Vex. Ships were still closing in, still confident in their victory. They had crushed the main human fleet. They had taken the colonies. They had killed millions of people. Now only Earth remained. But something was changing in the darkness between the stars. Something that had been sleeping was waking up. The Resource War veterans did not see this as a noble last stand. They saw it as another job that needed doing. They had fought impossible battles before. They had won when winning seemed impossible. They knew that sometimes survival mattered more than honor. Lieutenant Park So-min approached Commander Dae-ho as the last preparations were made. Sir, I do not understand. How can these old soldiers help us when our best ships have already failed? Dae-ho looked at the young woman and felt sorry for her. She had been trained to fight a clean war against civilized enemies, but the Vex were not civilized. They were predators who only understood strength. Because, child, he said, these are not soldiers. They are survivors, and they know how to make the hunters become the hunted. Captain Lee Wansu gathered all the surviving fleet commanders in the cargo bay of his old cruiser. The room smelled of machine oil and years of recycled air. Nothing like the clean, modern ships the Alliance preferred. Young officers wrinkled their noses at the smell, but the veterans felt at home here. This was what real warships smelled like. The star charts Wansu spread on the metal table were marked with red ink and handwritten notes. They showed things that did not appear on official maps, secret supply routes, hidden bases, patrol schedules that the Vex thought nobody knew about. His people had been watching the enemy for months, learning their habits, waiting for the right moment. Lieutenant Park So-min stared at the charts in shock. How do you know all this information? Where did these maps come from? The young officer could not understand how these ragged veterans had intelligence that the Alliance military did not possess. Wansu smiled his wolf smile and pointed to various marks on the chart. While you kids were fighting honorable battles, we were doing real work. We sent scouts. We watched. We learned. The Vex are good at crushing big fleets, but they are sloppy with their supply lines. They think they are safe in their own space. Chief Engineer Choi Min-ho stood up and activated a holographic display. The weapons she showed made several young officers gasp in horror. These devices had been banned by every civilized treaty in the galaxy, gravity mines that could crush entire squadrons. Nanoswarm missiles that ate through ship hulls like acid kinetic bombardment systems that turned asteroids into planet killers. The Alliance officers tried to protest. These weapons are illegal. They said they violate the Geneva Convention. They break the Galactic Warfare Accords. No civilized species would use such things. Choi Min-ho laughed bitterly. Civilized, she repeated. The Vex glassed 3 human colonies. They turned captured soldiers into living shields. They used biological weapons on civilian populations. Tell me about civilized when they show mercy. First, Captain Bae Sung-min stood up from where he had been quietly listening. He was younger than most veterans, but his eyes held the same hardness. He pulled up images on the display showing Vex attacks on human settlements. The pictures were horrible. Entire cities burned to ash, families killed just to make a point. This is what civilized enemies do to us, he said, pointing at the images. They do not follow rules. They do not show mercy. They kill everything they touch. But we are supposed to fight them with one hand tied behind our backs, because some aliens we never met signed papers saying war should be polite. The modifications to the remaining ships began immediately. The veterans worked with tools and techniques that the young officers had never seen. Safety systems that prevented reactors from overloading were removed. Power limiters that kept weapons from burning out were bypassed. Emergency protocols that would shut down dangerous experiments were disabled. Engineer Nam Ki-jun crawled through the guts of an Alliance destroyer, rewiring systems that had never been meant to work together. He installed devices that could turn the ship itself into a weapon if necessary. The original crew watched nervously as their beautiful, clean warship became something else, something that looked hungry. The weapon installations shocked the young officers most of all. Gravity mines were loaded into modified torpedo tubes. Each mine could create a field that would crush anything within 10,000 kilometers. The Alliance had banned these weapons because they were too dangerous to use near populated areas. But space was big, and mostly empty nanoswarm missiles went into the secondary launch bays. Each missile contained millions of tiny machines that would eat through enemy hull plating and internal systems. The swarms could not tell the difference between military and civilian targets, which was why civilized species refused to use them. But the Vex had already proven they did not care about such distinctions. The most terrifying weapons were the kinetic bombardment systems. These devices could accelerate asteroids to incredible speeds, turning chunks of rock into planet-killing projectiles. The energy required was enormous, and the targeting had to be perfect, but the effect was like dropping a mountain on your enemy. Captain Yoo-jin Ai studied the mission profiles for her suicide run to the Vex homeworld. Her ship would be loaded with enough firepower to crack a moon, but that was not the real weapon. The real weapon was the message she would broadcast before the enemy destroyed her. "What exactly will you tell them?" Lieutenant Park So-min asked. The young officer still did not understand how words could be more dangerous than weapons. Ginny smiled the same cold smile as the other veterans. "I am going to tell them who they are really fighting," she said. "The Vex think they conquered humanity when they destroyed our main fleet. They think we are a weak species that fights with honor and loses gracefully. Time to show them what humans are really like." The weapons testing began in secret locations far from Earth. Each device had to be calibrated and checked. The veterans worked with the focused intensity of people who knew their lives depended on getting everything right. They had fought with improvised equipment before, but this time they had access to military manufacturing. Gravity mines were tested on derelict ships. The results were spectacular and horrible. Metal twisted into impossible shapes as space itself bent around the weapon impact points. The test targets did not just explode. They were crushed into balls of compressed matter no bigger than basketballs. Nanoswarm missiles ate through target hulls in minutes. The tiny machines worked with terrifying efficiency, turning solid metal into metallic dust. They kept working until their power ran out, leaving nothing but empty space where ships used to be. The swarms could even be programmed to seek specific materials, making them perfect for destroying particular types of equipment. The kinetic bombardment tests used small asteroids launched at uninhabited moons. The impacts created craters visible from orbit. Each projectile hit with the force of multiple nuclear weapons, but left no radiation. The weapons were clean, efficient, and absolutely devastating. Young Alliance officers watched the tests with growing horror. These weapons could end civilizations, they said. They could destroy entire species if used without restraint. How can we justify using such things? Chief Engineer Choi Min-ho stopped her work and looked at the young officer with tired eyes. The Vex have already used worse against us, she said. They turned our own children into weapons. They poisoned whole planets. They created plagues designed to kill humans. Specifically, we did not start this level of warfare, but we will finish it. The weapon installations continued around the clock. Veterans who had not worked together in decades fell back into old patterns. Old friendships were renewed. Old arguments were settled. Everyone understood that they were preparing for the most important battle of their lives. Captain Lee Wan-soo stood in the modified command center of his flagship and watched his people work. They moved with the efficiency of experienced killers. Every action had a purpose. Every decision was made with deadly seriousness. These were not heroes preparing for a glorious battle. These were hunters preparing to kill dangerous prey. The psychological weapons were just as important as the physical ones. The veterans had learned during the resource wars that fear was often more effective than firepower. A terrified enemy made mistakes. An enemy who thought they were fighting monsters instead of humans would panic at crucial moments. Captain Song Mira specialized in psychological warfare. She had studied Vex culture and biology for months, learning their fears and weaknesses. Her team prepared recordings, broadcasts, and visual displays designed to make the enemy afraid. The sounds of human laughter mixed with alien death screams. The sight of human symbols painted in alien blood. Messages in perfect Vex language that promised horrible deaths. The final preparations took 3 days and nights. When everything was ready, the veterans gathered one last time to review their plans. The young Alliance officers were invited to listen but not to comment. This was not their kind of warfare. We have one advantage, Wan-soo told the assembled captains. The Vex think they have already won. They believe humans are weak because we tried to fight them with honor. They have no idea what we are really capable of when we stop playing by their rules. Chief Engineer Choi Min-ho added her own thoughts. The enemy has grown comfortable in their conquered territory, they said. Their supply lines are poorly defended. Their patrol schedules are predictable. They have made the mistake of underestimating a species that survived by being adaptable and ruthless. As the meeting ended and the captains returned to their ships, Lieutenant Park Somin approached Commander Kim Dae-ho with questions she had been afraid to ask. Sir, are we still the good guys if we use these weapons? Are we still fighting for the right reasons? Dae-ho looked at the young woman and saw himself from years ago, when he still believed war could be fought with clean hands. Good and evil are luxuries for people who are not about to be extinct, he said. The Vex chose the rules of this game when they decided to show no mercy. We are just playing by their rules. Now, Captain Bae Sung-min floated in the shadow of a dead moon, watching empty space through his ship sensors. For 6 hours his crew had waited in complete silence, using minimal power to avoid detection. Their ship looked like another piece of space, debris dark and cold against the starfield. But inside 23 humans prepared to kill. The Vex supply convoy dropped out of hyperspace exactly on schedule. 3 massive cargo ships protected by 2 escort cruisers. They were carrying fuel, cells, and ammunition to the fleet attacking Earth. The aliens felt safe here, deep in their own territory where no human ship should be able to reach. Sung-min smiled as the gravity mines activated. The weapons had been floating in space for days, waiting for the right moment. When the convoy arrived, the mines detected their gravitational signatures and triggered themselves. Space twisted around the alien ships, crushing them like tin cans in a giant fist. The first cargo ship imploded before its crew knew they were under attack. The second managed to send a distress signal that lasted exactly 3 seconds before its communication array was pulverized. The escort cruisers tried to maneuver, but gravity does not care about engine power or armor plating. They were compressed into spheres of twisted metal. Seung-min ordered his ship to move before enemy reinforcements could arrive. But first his crew painted human symbols on nearby asteroids using laser cutters. The markings would glow in the infrared spectrum, telling any Vex patrol that humans had been here. The psychological effect was just as important as the physical destruction. Similar attacks happened across Vex space that day. 27 supply convoys died without, sending complete distress signals. Fuel depots exploded in brilliant fireballs that could be seen from neighboring star systems. Communication relays went silent, leaving entire sectors cut off from Central Command. The aliens who had felt so confident just hours before suddenly found themselves looking over their shoulders. Admiral Park Dong-wook commanded the Vex fleet from his flagship deep in space around Earth. He was a veteran of 12 conquest campaigns. He had personally overseen the destruction of 6 different species. His people respected him as a master of warfare, but today brought reports that made no sense. Supply Officer Kex Thalen delivered the daily briefing with shaking hands. "Sir, we have lost contact with 37 supply convoys. In the past 24 hours, fuel shipments are down by 40%. Ammunition deliveries have stopped completely. Our communication network has 17 major gaps." Dong-wook stared at the tactical display showing the locations of the attacks. The human raids covered hundreds of light years. How could a defeated species strike so many targets simultaneously? Their main fleet was destroyed. Their colonies were occupied. Their homeworld was surrounded. "Show me the sensor recordings of these attacks," Dong-wook ordered. The few surviving pieces of footage were reviewed in stunned silence. Human ships appeared from nowhere, struck with devastating efficiency, and vanished before reinforcements could respond. They moved like ghosts through space that should have been impossible to navigate. The most disturbing footage came from a destroyed fuel depot. Security cameras showed human soldiers working methodically to plant explosives. While they worked, they laughed. They seemed to be enjoying themselves, treating the destruction of critical military supplies like a game. The final image showed one human looking directly at the camera and smiling before the explosion. Intelligence Officer Vex Corian had studied human behavior for years during the conquest planning. He had assured the fleet command that humans were predictable, logical creatures who fought with honor and accepted defeat gracefully. Now he stared at reports that challenged everything he thought he knew about the species. "These attacks show tactical knowledge that should be impossible," he said. "The humans know our patrol schedules, our supply routes, our communication frequencies. They are striking targets that are not even marked on most of our own charts. Someone has been watching us for months." The realization sent chills through the Vex command staff. Humans had been secretly observing their operations while the main war raged. Human scouts had mapped their territory, learned their weaknesses, prepared for this moment. The species they thought was primitive and weak had been planning all along. More reports arrived every hour. Mining operations reported human raiders stealing equipment and materials. Manufacturing plants went offline after precision sabotage attacks that targeted critical components. Patrol ships found empty space where their bases should be, with only floating debris and cryptic messages in human languages. Captain Yu Jin-ai led one of the deepest raids in Vex territory. Her small squadron hit a major staging area where the aliens stored weapons intended for the final assault on Earth. The facility was supposed to be impregnable, surrounded by sensor nets and defense platforms, but humans had learned to move through, space-like. It was their natural environment. Jin's ship carried modified engines that produced almost no detectable emissions. Her crew wore suits that absorbed electromagnetic radiation, making them nearly invisible to most sensors. They approached the target from the direction of a local star, using its radiation to mask their approach. The attack lasted exactly 17 minutes. Human boarding parties used cutting tools and explosives to breach the station hull, while fighter craft destroyed the external defenses. The aliens inside were not prepared for close combat in zero-gravity conditions. Humans moved through the station like deadly fish, while the Vex floundered helplessly. Before leaving, Jin's crew planted devices that would broadcast human music on all frequencies. The songs were translated into Vex language, but somehow they sounded threatening when played through alien communication systems. The psychological effect would be remembered long after the physical damage was repaired. Pattern repeated across dozens of star systems. Humans struck from impossible directions, used weapons that violated civilized warfare conventions, and vanished before effective retaliation could be organized. They left behind evidence that they had been watching, preparing, planning while the Vex thought they were winning. Admiral Dongwook called an emergency meeting of his senior staff. The war room aboard his flagship was filled with officers who had never experienced anything like these attacks. They had conquered weaker species before, but never faced enemies who seemed to live in the void between stars. These humans are not fighting like a defeated species, Dongwook said. They are fighting like predators who have been pretending to be prey. Our intelligence report said they were honorable creatures who followed rules of civilized warfare. What we face now is something entirely different. The Vex military machine that had crushed 12 different species suddenly found itself struggling against an enemy that refused to fight fair. Human raiders targeted supply lines instead of engaging in honorable fleet battles. They used banned weapons that caused maximum psychological damage. They treated the war like a game. They intended to win through cunning instead of superior firepower. Communication Officer Thex Valen reported that human transmissions were being detected throughout Vex space, but they were using encryption methods that seemed to change every few hours. The messages were being sent on frequencies that officially did not exist, using equipment that their scientists said was impossible to build. The humans are coordinating these attacks from hidden command centers. Fleet intelligence cannot locate their bases despite extensive sensor sweeps. They appear to have established supply lines that we cannot detect or interrupt. It is as if they have learned to live in space itself. Young Vex officers who had joined the military expecting glorious conquest suddenly found themselves afraid to leave secure bases. Patrol assignments in human space became punishment, details that volunteers refused to accept. Stories spread through the fleet about humans who could appear anywhere, strike without warning, and vanish like ghosts. The worst part for Vex morale was the growing realization that they were being hunted. The species they had dismissed as primitive and easily conquered was systematically dismantling their military infrastructure. While they remained powerless to strike back effectively, their own tactics of overwhelming force and brutal intimidation meant nothing against enemies who refused to stand still and fight. Captain Lee Wan-Su monitored the psychological effect of the raids from his mobile command ship. His vessel never stayed in the same location for more than a few hours, jumping between hiding spots in asteroid fields and dead star systems. The Vex were becoming afraid, and fear would make them make mistakes. The first phase is working perfectly, he told his assembled captains during a brief communication window. The enemy is learning that space belongs to us now. They thought they conquered it, but they have no idea how to live here like we do. Every supply ship that vanishes makes them more paranoid. Every base that gets destroyed makes them pull back into defensive positions. Chief Engineer Choi Min-ho added her own observations from monitoring Vex communications. Their logistics network is collapsing faster than we hoped, they said. They are having to escort every supply convoy with warships that should be attacking Earth. Their fleet commanders are arguing about whether to continue the offensive or fall back to protect their territory. The transformation was remarkable. The Vex, who had dominated space through superior numbers and firepower, suddenly found themselves reacting to human moves instead of dictating the pace of. Captain Eugene's ship limped through the outer edge of the Vex home system, with hull plating torn away and radiation burns scarring the metal. Her crew of 12 volunteers had fought their way past 3 patrol fleets using nothing but desperation and tricks learned in forgotten wars. Now they hung in the shadow of an ice giant, preparing for a mission that would end only one way. The journey had taken 8 days through the most heavily defended space in the galaxy. Her ship looked like a piece of wreckage, which was almost true. The exterior hull had been deliberately damaged to hide the sophisticated equipment inside. Fake debris trails made them appear to be a damaged freighter limping towards safety. Sergeant Nam Ki-jun checked the signal amplifiers one final time, while Communications Officer Hong Ye-jin prepared the recording equipment. They had been running silent for 18 hours, using minimal power to avoid the sensor sweeps that occurred every few minutes. Now, it was time to make noise loud enough to reach every corner of Vex space. The crew gathered in the small common area, for what they all knew was their last meal together. They were veterans of the Resource Wars people, who had volunteered for impossible missions before. But this one was different. This time, the entire war might depend on what they said in the next few minutes. Ginny looked at her people and felt proud. They had no hope of survival, no chance of rescue, no possibility of seeing their families again. But they sat calmly eating recycled food and making jokes like they were preparing for a training exercise. This was what humans could be when everything was at stake. "We all know why we are here," she said to her crew. The young officers, back at Earth, think we are crazy to throw our lives away for a radio broadcast. They do not understand that sometimes words can be more dangerous than weapons. Today, we are going to teach the Vex what it means to wake up sleeping predators. The message had been carefully planned by the veteran commanders. Every word was chosen for maximum psychological impact. The goal was not just to threaten the enemy, but to make them understand that they had made a terrible mistake. The Vex thought they were fighting weak humans who could be easily conquered. Ginny activated the communication array and began broadcasting on every frequency the Vex used for military communications. The signal was powerful enough to reach relay stations across their entire empire. Within minutes, every Vex commander, every patrol ship, every base would hear her words. "Attention, Vex Empire," she said in perfect alien dialect, speaking directly into the camera. "This is Captain Eugene A. of the Human Resource War Veterans. Your forces are currently surrounding Earth, believing you have won a great victory. You are wrong." The transmission continued as enemy ships began converging on their position. Ginny spoke calmly while her crew tracked incoming vessels on their sensors. She had perhaps 10 minutes before the first interceptors arrived, long enough to deliver the message that would change everything. "You believe you conquered humanity when you destroyed our main fleet," she continued. "But those were just the civilized humans, the ones who tried to fight you with honor and rules, the ones who believed war should have limits. You have never faced the real humans, the ones who learned warfare in places where mercy was weakness. Communications." Officer Hong Yejin reported that the signal was reaching Vex relay stations across dozens of star systems. The message would be recorded and analyzed by their intelligence services, broadcast to their fleet commanders, studied by their war planners. Every important Vex leader would hear these words. "For the past month, your supply convoys have been disappearing," Jinne said. "Your bases have been destroyed. Your patrol fleets have found nothing but empty space where your facilities should be. You think this is the desperate last stand of a dying species. You are wrong again." The first enemy ships appeared on their sensors, fast interceptors trying to reach them before the transmission could continue. But Jinne had positioned her ship carefully. The ice giant gravity field would delay their approach, and the radiation from its magnetic field would interfere with their targeting systems. "These attacks are not desperation," she continued. "They are preparation. The humans you fought before were soldiers, following rules, trying to represent their species with honor. The humans hunting you now are something different. They are survivors who learned warfare in conflicts that would have broken your people." Sergeant Nam Ki-jun reported that 6 Vex cruisers were approaching from different angles. They would arrive in approximately 4 minutes. Jinne nodded and continued speaking. She had rehearsed this message dozens of times, knowing she would have only one chance to get it right. "Let me tell you about the Resource Wars," she said to her unseen alien audience. "Humans fighting humans for survival in the darkness between stars. No rules, no mercy, no hope, except what you could take with your own hands. The soldiers who survived those wars learned that victory belongs to whoever is willing to do anything to win." The tactical display showed more enemy ships converging on their position. A full battle group was forming around the ice giant, determined to stop the transmission. But Jinne's ship was hidden in the planet radiation shadow, and her crew had disabled all non-essential systems to avoid detection. "You conquered our colonies because we tried to protect civilians. You destroyed our fleets because we fought honorable battles. You thought. This made us weak, she said. But you only fought the humans who were holding back. The ones who were trying to be better than their nature. Communications officer. Hong Yejin smiled grimly as she monitored the enemy response Vex command channels were, filled with confused orders and panicked reports. Their leaders were trying to understand what they were hearing, trying to decide if this was real intelligence or psychological warfare. Now the old wolves are awake. Jin'ei continued. The humans who know that survival matters more than honor, who learned that sometimes you have to become a monster to defeat monsters. They are not trying to save their civilization anymore. They are trying to save their species, and they will do anything necessary. The enemy ships were close now, their weapons charging for the final assault. Jin'ei crew prepared for the end, but they showed no fear. They had accomplished their mission. The message was already spreading through Vex space, already being analyzed by alien intelligence officers who would soon understand its implications. I want you to know their names, she said as explosions began lighting up space around her ship. Li Wansu, who held an entire pirate fleet at bay with a damaged cruiser Choi. Minho, who kept a colony ship running for 6 months with spare parts and determination. Bei Seung Min, who fought a 3-day battle in an asteroid field against impossible odds. The list continued as enemy fire got closer. Each name represented a human who had survived impossible situations, who had won battles that should have been lost, who had learned to find strength in desperation. These were the people now hunting the Vex through their own territory. You thought you were conquering a weak species that fought with rules, Jin'ei said as her ship shuddered under weapons fire. But humans do not have rules when their survival is threatened. We have one law: the strong do what they can and the weak suffer what they must. You made us strong. The final moments of the transmission were accompanied by the sound of hull breaches and system failures, but Jin'ei's voice remained calm, professional, almost cheerful as she delivered her closing words. The Vex, listening across their empire, heard her laugh as death closed in. The war you thought you won is just beginning, she said. We are not the humans you conquered before. We are the ones who crawled out of hell and learned to call it home. We are coming for you in the dark between stars, and when we find you, there will be no mercy, no rules, no hope for anything except the death you chose when you decided to threaten our families. The transmission ended in a massive explosion that lit up the ice giant rings. Jin'ei's ship and crew vanished in a brief star, but their message had already reached every corner of Vex space. The recording would be played in alien command centers, studied by xenobiologists, broadcast to troops who were beginning to understand what they faced within. Hours Vex intelligence officers were analyzing every word, looking for clues about human capabilities and intentions. What they found terrified them more than the physical attacks. The humans were not just using different tactics, they had become something different, something that viewed war as a problem to be solved rather than a contest to be won. Admiral Park Dong-wook listened to the recording in his private quarters aboard the flagship. He had conquered 12 different species in his career, but none of them had ever spoken like this. The human female had not threatened or boasted, she had simply explained why the Vex were going to lose. The worst part was her tone. Jin'ei had not sounded angry or desperate. She had sounded professional, almost bored, like someone explaining basic facts to a slow student. The implication was clear to the Vex commander. Humanity was not emotional about this war. They were treating it like any other job that needed doing. Communications across the Vex fleet buzzed with nervous chatter as officers tried to understand what they had heard. Some dismissed it as propaganda designed to make them afraid, but others remembered the supply convoys that had vanished, the bases that had been destroyed, the precision of attacks that seemed impossible. The psychological effect rippled through Vex space faster than their fastest ships. Young soldiers who had joined expecting easy conquest began requesting. The Vex Empire discovered what it meant to be afraid. 3 weeks after Captain Yu Jin'ei's final transmission, their supply lines had collapsed into chaos. Cargo ships traveled in heavily armed convoys that still lost half their loads to human raiders. Patrol fleets found empty space where their bases should be, with only floating debris and messages written in languages that seemed designed to sound threatening. Admiral Park Dong-wook stood in his command center staring at reports that defied everything he understood about warfare. 17 major supply depots destroyed in one day. 6 patrol squadrons missing without sending distress signals. Communication networks failing across 4 sectors as relay stations simply vanished from sensor readings. The humans were not fighting like any species the Vex had conquered before. Instead of defending territory, they moved like ghosts through space, striking without warning and disappearing before retaliation could be organized. They seemed to live in the void between stars, setting up bases in places no civilized species would consider habitable. Supply Officer Kex Thalan delivered the daily briefing with barely controlled panic in his voice. Sir, fuel reserves are down to 30% of normal levels. Ammunition supplies are critically low. Food shipments are not getting through to forward positions. Our logistics network is collapsing faster than we can repair it. The worst part was not knowing where the attacks would come next. Human raiders appeared to have detailed knowledge of every Vex installation patrol route and supply schedule. They struck at the most vulnerable moments, causing maximum damage while avoiding areas where defenses were strong. Captain Lee Wansu coordinated the campaign from a mobile command ship that never stayed in the same location for more than 6 hours. His vessel jumped between hiding spots in asteroid fields, dead star systems, and the shadows of gas giant moons. The Vex could not track him because he used navigation techniques learned during the resource wars when hunted. Humans had to survive in places where nobody else could live. The psychological warfare was proving just as effective as the physical attacks. Colonel Songmira led teams that specialized in making the enemy afraid. Her people studied Vex culture, biology, and psychology, looking for weaknesses that could be exploited. They left behind recordings that played alien death screams on endless loops. They filled captured enemy ships with harmless but terrifying creatures from Earth ecosystems that looked like nightmares to alien eyes. The most effective psychological weapon was uncertainty. Vex soldiers never knew when humans might appear from the darkness. They started seeing threats in every shadow, hearing human voices in communication static, finding human symbols painted on surfaces where nobody should have been able to reach. The fear spread through their ranks like a disease. Young Vex officers who had joined the military expecting glorious conquest now refused assignments to human space patrol duty, became punishment that volunteers would not accept. Stories spread through the fleet about humans who could walk through solid walls, appear in sealed compartments, and vanish like smoke when confronted. Lieutenant Vex Corian had been studying human behavior for years, but the species he faced now did not match any of his research. The humans he had analyzed were logical, predictable, creatures who valued honor and followed rules. The humans hunting his people through space seemed to enjoy causing fear and confusion. "These are not the same humans we conquered," he reported to Admiral Dong Wook. "The psychological profiles do not match. The tactical patterns are completely different. It is as if we are fighting an entirely different species that happens to look human." The reality was even more disturbing. The humans had not changed. They had simply stopped pretending to be something they were not. The resource war veterans represented humanity's true nature when survival was threatened. They were adaptable, ruthless, and completely willing to become monsters if that was what victory required. Engineering teams reported finding human devices in impossible locations, surveillance equipment hidden inside sealed bulkheads, explosive charges planted in areas that required security clearance to access, communication jammers installed in places where no unauthorized person should have been able to reach. "How are they getting inside our most secure facilities?" Dongwook demanded from his security chief. "The bases they are sabotaging have multiple layers of protection. Sensor nets, guard patrols, encrypted access codes. Nobody should be able to penetrate these defenses." Security Chief Thex Valen had no good answers. "Sir, our best theory is that humans have been infiltrating our installations for months, possibly years. They may have people living inside our most secure facilities disguised as maintenance workers or support personnel. The species appears capable of long-term planning that we severely underestimated." The infiltration operations were indeed extensive. Human agents had been placing themselves throughout Vex territory long before the main war began. They worked as janitors, maintenance crews, supply handlers, any job that let them move freely through enemy facilities. When the time came, they activated like sleeper cells striking from within. "Captain, Bae Sung-min led one of the most daring infiltration missions. His team had been living inside a major Vex weapons manufacturing facility for 8 months disguised as alien workers. They had false identities, forged documents, and surgical modifications that let them pass casual inspection. When the signal came, they struck with devastating efficiency. Explosives planted throughout the facility detonated simultaneously, destroying production equipment and killing key personnel. The survivors found human symbols painted on the walls in a substance that glowed with radioactive light. The message was clear. Nowhere was safe. The Vex military commanders held emergency meetings trying to understand how their supposedly superior forces were being systematically dismantled by a species they had dismissed as primitive. Their conquest of human space had seemed so easy that they had grown overconfident. "We are not fighting refugees, fleeing a lost war," Admiral Dong-wook told his staff. "We are fighting something that was waiting for us to make mistakes. The humans led us into their territory, let us overextend our supply lines, and now they are cutting us apart, piece by piece." The strategic situation was becoming impossible to ignore. Vex forces were scattered across dozens of star systems trying to protect supply lines that stretched too far. Their fleet was designed for quick conquests, not extended campaigns against enemies who refused to fight conventional battles. More disturbing were the reports from occupied human colonies. Vex garrison troops were finding their bases surrounded by hostile populations that seemed to know their every move. Local humans provided intelligence to the raiders, guided them through defensive networks, and sabotaged equipment when the opportunity arose. The humans are not acting like a conquered people. Intelligence officer Vex Korean reported civilian populations are actively supporting military operations against us. They treat the raiders like liberators rather than terrorists. Our occupation forces are under constant harassment from people who were supposed to be pacified. The truth was that the human colonies had never truly surrendered. They had been waiting for rescue, knowing that, somewhere in the darkness between stars, their own people were preparing to come back. The arrival of the veteran raiders gave them hope and turned passive resistance into active rebellion. Chief Engineer Choi Min-ho monitored Vex communications. From her hidden base inside a hollowed-out asteroid, her technical teams had been intercepting enemy transmissions for weeks, analyzing their codes and learning their operational procedures. The aliens were starting to panic. Their logistics network is completely broken, she reported to Captain Won-soo during a brief communication window. Fuel deliveries are failing. Ammunition is running low and their repair facilities cannot keep up with the damage we are causing. They are being forced to choose between continuing the attack on Earth or protecting their own territory. The choice was becoming urgent. Vex forces around Earth were running out of supplies, while their rear areas came under constant attack. The fleet that had seemed invincible just months before was now struggling to maintain basic operations. Their commanders faced an impossible decision. Admiral Dong-wook realized that the war had fundamentally changed. His people had expected to fight a conventional enemy that would surrender when faced with overwhelming force. Instead, they found themselves in a nightmare conflict against opponents who seemed to thrive in conditions that would break most species. "The humans do not fight like civilized beings," he told his senior staff. "They fight like wild animals that have learned to use technology. They show no mercy, follow no rules, and seem to enjoy causing fear. They are everything we were taught other species should not be." But the most frightening realization was yet to come. The attacks were escalating in both frequency and sophistication. The humans were not just fighting to survive anymore. They were systematically destroying Vex military capability with the goal of total victory. The species that had seemed so weak was revealing itself to be the most dangerous enemy the Vex had ever faced. The tables had turned completely. The hunters had become the hunted, and the predators who had dominated the galaxy through superior firepower now found themselves running from enemies who had turned the darkness of space itself into their weapon. 6 months after Commander Kim Dae-ho sent his desperate call for help, the war ended not with a great space battle, but with a simple message delivered to the Vex High Command. The aliens who had once demanded humanity unconditional surrender now found themselves staring at detailed blueprints of every major military installation in their home system, along with proof that human infiltration teams had been living undetected in their most secure facilities for weeks. Admiral Park Dong-wook read the intelligence report in his private quarters aboard the flagship that no longer led a conquering fleet. The document was written in perfect Vex script and contained information that should have been impossible for any outsider to obtain. Guard schedules, shift rotations, security codes, even the personal habits of high-ranking officers. The message was polite, almost friendly in tone. It explained that human agents had been studying Vex society for months, learning their weaknesses and preparing for this moment. The installations could be destroyed at any time, but humanity was willing to discuss terms. The alternative was simple, complete annihilation of Vex military capability and the conquest of their homeworld fleet commander. Thex Corian, who had spent years studying human behavior, found himself facing negotiators who defied everything he thought he knew about the species. The humans who arrived for the peace talks were not the honorable warriors he had expected. They were cold professional killers who spoke about warfare like it was a business transaction. Captain Kim Dae-ho, now promoted to admiral, sat across the negotiation table from alien leaders who looked nothing like the confident conquerors they had been a year ago. The Vex delegation kept glancing nervously at their human counterparts as if expecting them to produce weapons at any moment. The psychological warfare had been devastatingly effective. The terms presented by the humans were not a peace treaty. They were a complete restructuring of galactic power. The Vex Empire would release all human prisoners, pay massive reparations in resources and technology, and accept permanent monitoring stations throughout their territory. Any future aggression against human space would result in the immediate destruction of their homeworld. Admiral Dong-wook tried to negotiate for better terms, arguing that his people had been following accepted practices of galactic warfare. The response from Captain Lee Won-soo was delivered with a smile that made the alien commander shiver. "You followed your rules," he said. "We followed ours. The difference is that our rules work." The Vex had made the mistake of believing that superior technology and overwhelming numbers guaranteed victory. They had not understood that humans were the product of a violent evolutionary history that had created a species uniquely adapted for warfare. When pushed to the edge of extinction, humanity had revealed its true nature. Peace ceremony took place aboard a neutral station with representatives from multiple alien species watching the proceedings. Many of the observers had been planning their own moves against human territory, assuming that Earth would fall to the Vex invasion. Now they witnessed the complete reversal of what everyone had expected to be an easy conquest. Colonel Song Mira stood with the other human negotiators wearing the same cold expression as her colleagues. The psychological warfare specialist had spent months studying how to make aliens afraid, and the techniques had proven more effective than anyone hoped. The Vex delegation could barely look at the humans without remembering the terror campaigns that had broken their military morale. The signing ceremony was brief and professional. The Vex representatives agreed to every human demand without attempting further negotiation. They had learned what happened to species that underestimated humanity's capacity for violence. Their military was broken. Their supply lines were destroyed, and their homeworld was essentially hostage to human agents who could strike at any moment. As the documents were finalized, Admiral Dong-wook asked the question that had haunted him for months. "How did you do it? How did a species we had defeated so easily become so dangerous in such a short time?" Captain Lee Won-soo exchanged glances with his fellow veterans before answering. "You never defeated us," he said. "You defeated the humans who were trying to be better than their nature. The ones who believed war should have limits and mercy should be shown to enemies. When you threatened our families, you woke up the humans who know that survival is the only rule that matters." Chief Engineer Choi Min-ho added her own perspective with the blunt honesty that had made her legendary among the veterans. "You made the mistake of thinking we were like other species you had conquered," she said. "Other aliens fight until they lose and then they surrender. Humans fight until they win or until there is nothing left to fight with. You chose to find out which one we would do." The broader implications of human victory rippled through galactic civilization within weeks. Species that had been planning their own aggressive moves against human territory quietly canceled their military preparations. The message was clear. Humanity was not the weak newcomer that could be easily dominated. They were apex predators who had been pretending to be harmless. Lieutenant Park So-min, now promoted to captain, watched the ceremony with mixed feelings. The young officer had learned hard lessons about the nature of warfare and the price of survival. The clean, honorable military she had joined no longer existed, replaced by something more effective but far more ruthless. The veterans made no apologies for their methods when questioned by younger officers who struggled with what they had witnessed. Captain Bae Sung-min explained the philosophy that had guided their campaign with characteristic directness. "Honor is a luxury for species that are not about to go extinct," he said. "We chose survival over honor, and that choice saved our people." The monitoring stations installed throughout Vex territory were staffed by veteran personnel who understood that peace was maintained through strength rather than goodwill. The aliens would be watched constantly, with any sign of renewed military buildup met with immediate and overwhelming response. The human agents, who had infiltrated Vex society, remained in place, becoming a permanent intelligence network that could gather information or conduct sabotage as needed. The aliens lived with the constant knowledge that their conquerors were watching from within, their own society, ready to strike if they ever threatened human space again. Other alien species sent diplomatic missions to Earth, seeking reassurance that humanity had no expansionist ambitions. The veterans who met with these delegations made it clear that humans had no interest in conquest but would respond to any threat with the same ruthlessness they had shown the Vex captain. Yujin-I's sacrifice had not been forgotten. The transmission that cost her life became required study for all human military personnel. Her final words about humans crawling out of hell and learning to call it home became an unofficial motto for the veterans who had saved their species. The transformation of human society was permanent. The clean, modern military that had tried to fight with honor was replaced by forces trained in the harsh realities of survival warfare. The veterans became the teachers of a new generation that would never again make the mistake of showing mercy to enemies who showed none. The galaxy learned that humans were not just another species to be conquered or negotiated with. They were something far more dangerous, a species that could become whatever they needed to be when their survival was threatened. The Vex had wanted to face civilized humans, and had gotten their wish until humanity decided that civilization was less important than survival. As the peace ceremony concluded, and the various delegations prepared to depart, Admiral Kim Dae-ho reflected on what they had accomplished. The cost had been enormous, not just in lives lost, but in the innocence that could never be recovered. They had saved humanity by embracing the darkest aspects of human nature. The war was over, but the legend would endure across the galaxy. For generations, alien species would tell stories about what happened when humans stopped trying to be civilized and remembered what they really were. The message was simple and terrifying. Some species fought until they lost, while humans fought until they won.